What's up, Doc? What's up, Doc? What's up, Doc?
Few sounds can hit you with instant nostalgia like that Looney Tunes theme. Saturday mornings, a bowl of cereal, and those wild, over-the-top cartoons that somehow never got old. For generations, Bugs Bunny, Daffy Duck, Porky Pig, and the rest of the crew weren't just characters. They were part of our childhood, and honestly, they still hold up today. But here's the thing, Looney Tunes has been around for nearly a century. That's a lot of different eras. Black and white beginnings, the glory years, the TV reruns, the weird revivals, and yes, even those modern reboots. Some eras gave us timeless comedy gold, others not so much. So today we're going all in, ranking every major era of Looney Tunes from worst to best. Which era really captured that chaotic magic? And which ones left us wishing they'd just stuck to the classics? Let's find out. Before we get into the video, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more animated memories. Alright, coming in at number 9, we've got the Looney Tunes show. And yeah, this one is controversial. Now, don't get me wrong, this show had its fans. And I'll admit, it was bold. Instead of wacky slapstick shorts, they went full sitcom. Bugs and Daffy as roommates, Lola reimagined as this over-the-top chatterbox, and episodes that played out more like Friends than Rabbit of Seville. But here's the thing, when people think Looney Tunes, they expect chaos. Anvils dropping, dynamite exploding, Bugs outsmarting hunters, Daffy losing his mind. Instead, what we got here was a slower, dialogue-heavy comedy. While some of the writing was sharp, it just didn't feel loony. I mean, come on. Daffy Duck arguing with a clerk at the DMV? That's a long way from Duck Dodgers in the 24.5th century. Now, I'll give credit where it's due. This version of Lola Bunny, voiced by Kristen Wiig, was hilarious in her own way. Instead of just being Bugs' love interest, she became her own chaotic ball of energy. Some fans even say this is the definitive Lola. And Porky? Absolute highlight. The dude was awkward, wholesome, and kind of a tragic best friend to Daffy. Easily one of the most relatable versions of him. But here's why it lands at number 9. It strayed too far from the Looney Tunes identity. It wasn't bad. In fact, as a sitcom, it was pretty clever. But as Looney Tunes, it just didn't deliver that wild slapstick energy that made the franchise legendary. That's why most fans, including myself, can't put it above any other era. So yeah, the Looney Tunes show earns a respectful last place on this list. Funny? Absolutely, but loony? Not so much. Coming in at number 8, we've got the 2000s revival era. And man, this was a weird time to be a Looney Tunes fan. On one hand, Warner Brothers was experimenting like crazy. We got Baby Looney Tunes in 2002, which basically turned Bugs, Daffy, and the gang into preschool mascots. Cute, sure. But this was clearly aimed at toddlers, not the chaos-loving crowd that grew up with anvils and explosions. Then we got Duck Dodgers in 2003. Now this was a gem. Daffy as a space hero, Porky as his sidekick, Marvin the Martian as the villain. It was clever, self-aware, and honestly one of the best things to come out of this decade for Looney Tunes. Fans still look back on it as a highlight, but then we got Lunatics Unleashed. Remember that? The futuristic, anime-inspired, edgy rebrand where the Looney Tunes were superheroes? Yeah, people hated it at first. It felt like Warner Brothers was trying way too hard to make Bugs and Daffy look cool for the 2000s. Now, I'll be fair. Lunatics has gained a bit of a cult following today, but back then it was like watching your childhood heroes go through an awkward teenage phase. And of course, we can't forget Looney Tunes, back in action from 2003. It was supposed to be the big comeback film after Space Jam, but instead, it bombed at the box office. Critics didn't know what to make of it, audiences barely showed up, and just like that, Warner Brothers kinda shelved the tunes for a while. So here's why this era sits at number 8. It was all over the place. Some hits, some misses. Duck Dodgers was brilliant, but Baby Looney Tunes and Lunatics split the fan base. And Back in Action failing really hurt the brand. The 2000s revival deserves credit for keeping the tunes alive and experimenting, but it just couldn't find a consistent identity. Fun to look back on, but definitely not their strongest era. Sliding into number 7, we've got the TV syndication era, the 1970s and 80s, and honestly, this was more about survival than innovation. This was the Saturday morning era. Warner Brothers basically stopped making new Looney Tunes shorts by the end of the 60s, so what did they do? They repackaged the classics into TV blocks like the Bugs Bunny Roadrunner show. And if you were a kid back then, this was probably your first real exposure to Bugs, Daffy, and the whole gang. Every Saturday morning, millions of kids would tune in and watch the Golden Age shorts back to back. And you know what? It worked. Looney Tunes stayed relevant, even without new content. Warner Brothers even tried to stretch things further by creating compilation films. The Bugs Bunny Roadrunner movie in 1979, the Looney Bugs Bunny movie in 1981, basically greatest hits collection stitched together with new bridging animation. Not groundbreaking, but they kept the brand alive. But here's the catch. As much as this era kept Looney Tunes on TV screens, it didn't give us much new. The creativity, the innovation, the wild energy of the Golden Age, that was gone. Warner Brothers was basically just running on reruns. So yeah, the syndication era was crucial for keeping the tunes in the public eye, but let's be real, it wasn't pushing the franchise forward. That's why it lands here at number 7. Nostalgic? Absolutely. Creative? Not really. This was more like keeping the engine running until something bigger came along. Alright, at number 6, we've got the very beginning, the black and white era, running from 1930 to about 1933. And let's be honest here, this was the experimental stage. Back then, Warner Brothers didn't have Bugs Bunny or Daffy Duck. Their first real star was Bosco, this cheerful little character who was basically a Mickey Mouse knockoff. Then later came Buddy, who was so forgettable that even hardcore Looney Tunes fans sometimes joke about him being the worst main character in the lineup. Most of these early shorts were built around music. That's because Warner Brothers owned a music library, and the whole idea was to animate gags in sync with songs they already had rights to, which is why so many of these cartoons feel more like musical numbers than actual comedies. And I've gotta be real. Compared to what came later, these shorts feel primitive. The jokes don't land the same way, the characters don't have strong personalities yet, and the animation is, well, let's just say it was a work in progress. But here's why this era still matters. Without it, there is no Looney Tunes. This is where the foundation was laid. Animators like Friz Freleng and Hugh Harmon were cutting their teeth, figuring out timing, and slowly experimenting with character-driven humor. You can actually see the DNA of what would later become the Golden Age. And even though Bosco and Buddy never reached Bugs Bunny status, they opened the door for Porky Pig, who would arrive in 1935 and really change the game. So while this era doesn't hold up as a fan favorite, it's historically important. So yeah, the black and white era isn't one most fans revisit for fun, but as the scrappy little start of Looney Tunes, it earns its spot at number 6. Alright, coming in at number 5, we've got the modern reboots. Basically 2015 to now. And let me tell you, this era has been a roller coaster. It started with Wobbit, later rebranded as New Looney Tunes, and it wasn't bad. It tried to bring back slapstick, but the humor felt kind of watered down. Bugs had a lot of new side characters that didn't stick, and fans just didn't vibe with it the way they did with the classics. But then in 2020, Warner Brothers dropped Looney Tunes cartoons on HBO Max. And this was the real comeback. Hand-drawn animation, over-the-top violence, classic character designs. It felt like the 1940s all over again, but with modern polish. Fans praised it for bringing back that chaotic anything can happen energy. These shorts didn't try to reinvent the wheel. They went straight for the slapstick, the physical comedy, and the zany timing that made Looney Tunes legendary. And it worked. Now, we've also got to mention Space Jam, a new legacy in 2021. Let's be real, like it was flashy, full of cameos, but it didn't hit the same way the original did. Some fans had fun with it, but for a lot of people, it felt more like a Warner Brothers commercial than a true Looney Tunes movie. So why is this era at number 5? Because it's a mix. Wobbit was forgettable. Space Jam 2 was divisive, but Looney Tunes cartoons? That proved the tunes could still thrive in the modern age without losing what made them iconic. In short, this era gave us the strongest Looney Tunes content we've seen in decades, even if not every project landed, and honestly, it gives me hope for where the franchise is headed next. Coming in at number 4, we've got the Silver Age, or what a lot of fans call the Decline era, running from the mid-50s to the end of the 60s. And here's the thing, this is where Looney Tunes started losing steam, but it still gave us some of the greatest shorts ever made. Think about it, Opera Doc, 1957, Duck-a-Muck, 1953, One Froggy Evening, 1955. These weren't just good cartoons, they were masterpieces. Some of them are even in the National Film Registry. This was Chuck Jones and Friz Freleng at their absolute peak as artists. But here's the problem. Warner Brothers started slashing budgets. Animation got cheaper, timing wasn't as sharp, and eventually the studio shut down its animation department. When they brought it back, the shorts just didn't have that same spark. I mean, no disrespect, but if you've ever sat through one of those endless Daffy versus Speedy shorts, yeah, you know this wasn't the glory days. To make matters worse, a lot of the top talent left. Chuck Jones got fired and went on to create The Grinch and Tom and Jerry's later shorts. Friz Freleng and DePatie set up their own studio and worked on The Pink Panther. Basically, the brains behind Looney Tunes were moving on. But here's why this era ranks at number 4 instead of lower. Despite the decline, the highs were really high. What's Opera Doc? Alone is considered one of the greatest cartoons of all time. The artistry and experimentation of the late 50s was stunning, even if the 60s side of this era was, let's say, rougher. So yeah, the Silver Age is complicated. It's half legendary, half disappointing. But even in decline, Looney Tunes managed to deliver some of the most iconic cartoons ever made. Taking the number 3 spot, we've got the Looney Tunes renaissance of the 1990s. And honestly, this was the era that proved the tunes still had gas left in the tank. It all started with Tiny Toon Adventures in 1990, produced by Steven Spielberg. Instead of just recycling Bugs and Daffy, Warner Brothers created a new generation of characters. Buster and Babs Bunny, Plucky Duck, Hampton Pig. But they lived in Acme Acres and trained under the original Looney Tunes. It was fresh, it was clever, and it brought that same chaotic energy kids loved. Then came Animaniacs in 1993, and while not strictly Looney Tunes, it carried the same DNA. Slapstick comedy, fourth wall breaks, musical gags. The writing was sharp enough for adults, but zany enough for kids. It became a cultural phenomenon and honestly gave Warner Brothers its strongest cartoon lineup since the 1950s. And of course, we can't talk about the 90s without mentioning Space Jam in 1996. Bugs Bunny teaming up with Michael Jordan? Absolute pop culture juggernaut. The movie made over $250 million worldwide, introduced the tunes to an entirely new generation, and made them cool again. Lola Bunny even debuted here and became an instant fan favorite. The merchandise was everywhere. T-shirts, toys, cereal boxes. If you grew up in the 90s, Looney Tunes weren't just cartoons, they were a lifestyle. You couldn't walk through a mall without seeing Bugs or Taz on someone's clothes. But here's why this era lands at number 3. While it was amazing for revitalizing the brand, it wasn't pure Looney Tunes. The original shorts weren't really the focus anymore. It was spin-offs, experiments, and crossover projects. Great stuff, but not quite the same timeless slapstick magic as the Golden Age. So yeah, the 90s renaissance was a blast. It gave us Tiny Toons, Animaniacs, Space Jam, and a ton of nostalgia. Not the original peak of Looney Tunes, but definitely the most fun comeback the franchise ever had. At number 2, we've got the early color era, the Merry Melodies years from 1934 to 1939. And this is where the tunes went from experimental shorts to actual characters we still love today. Porky Pig became the first real breakout star in 1935 with I Haven't Got a Hat. He wasn't just a music-synced dancing character like Bosco, he had a personality. Nervous, stuttery, and awkward, but also charming. Audiences connected with him instantly, and suddenly Warner Bros. Had a true headliner. Then came 1937, it's Porky's Duck Hunt. And boom, Daffy Duck is born. This wasn't the greedy, selfish Daffy we'd get later. This was a wild, unpredictable, completely insane duck, bouncing all over the screen. He was so different from anything else in animation at the time. Tex Avery and Bob Clampett basically invented cartoon anarchy right there. We also got early versions of Elmer Fudd, back when he was called Egghead. Not quite the polished hunter we'd see later, but you can see the blueprint forming. And of course, let's not forget, this is when Warner Brothers committed to color. Disney had already gone that route, and Warner didn't want to be left behind. Suddenly, Looney Tunes and Merry Melodies were brighter, flashier, and more appealing than ever. So why does this era land at number 2? Because this is where the foundation of Looney Tunes comedy was built. Porky gave the studio its first real star. Daffy introduced wild, personality-driven humor. And the directors, Tex Avery, Chuck Jones, Bob Clampett, were finding their voices. They were experimenting, pushing boundaries, and setting the stage for greatness. This wasn't the peak just yet, but without this era, we wouldn't have a golden age. This was the warm-up, and man, what a warm-up it was. And finally, at number 1, no surprises here. The golden age of Looney Tunes from 1940 to 1955. This is the era, the absolute peak. The reason Looney Tunes went from just another cartoon studio to the standard of animated comedy. It all officially kicked off in 1940 with A Wild Hare. That was the first time Bugs Bunny appeared in his recognizable form. And the very first time we heard him say, "Hey, what's up, Doc?" Instantly iconic. Bugs wasn't just another funny animal. He was cool, confident, witty, and always one step ahead. He redefined what a cartoon character could be. Daffy Duck evolved too. He went from chaotic lunatic to the greedy, jealous, spotlight-hungry duck we know today. That gave us one of the greatest comedy rivalries in cartoon history, Bugs versus Daffy, with poor Elmer Fudd always caught in the middle. This era also introduced a whole army of legends. Yosemite Sam, Sylvester and Tweety, Foghorn Leghorn, Pepe Le Pew, Marvin the Martian, the Tasmanian Devil. Warner Brothers was firing on all cylinders, cranking out star after star, and the directors, Chuck Jones, Friz Freleng, Tex Avery, Bob Clampett, these guys weren't just making kids' cartoons. They were creating masterpieces of timing, animation, and comedy. Tex Avery revolutionized sight gags and exaggeration. Chuck Jones perfected character-driven humor with shorts like Duck Amuck and What's Opera, Doc? Friz Freleng nailed pacing and snappy music timing. Every short was like a mini masterclass in cartooning. The Golden Age is where we got the Roadrunner and Wile E. Coyote's endless chase. It's where Bugs outwitted opera singers, baseball players, and even the devil himself. It's where Daffy literally fought with his own animator. The creativity was off the charts, and the influence is still being felt today. And here's the kicker. These weren't just cartoons for kids. They were witty, satirical, and sometimes straight up savage. They spoofed culture, politics, war, Hollywood, and even other cartoons. That's why they've stood the test of time. Adults can watch them and laugh just as hard as kids. So yeah, no contest. The golden age of Looney Tunes is the reason Bugs, Daffy, Porky, and the gang are still household names nearly a century later. This wasn't just Warner Brothers' best era. It's one of the greatest eras in all of animation history. And that's our full ranking of every Looney Tunes era, from the black and white beginnings to the golden classics to the strange reboots and everything in between. It's crazy to think how long these characters have been making us laugh. Nearly a century later, and Bugs Bunny is still saying, "What's up, Doc?" like it never gets old. Now I want to hear from you. Which Looney Tunes era is your favorite? Did I rank them right, or do you think Bugs and the gang deserve a different order? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'll be checking them out.